Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. It is Thursday, the 4th day of Tishrei, our first Talmud session in 5783, a year of Hakel. At the conclusion of a Shemitah year, we read in Parshas Vayakel about the Hakel that would happen once in 7 years following the Shemitah year. Well, my dear friends, that's this year. And we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19. We are on 134b Kuf Lamed Dalid Amud Beis. The general gist of our chapter, which I'll share the screen in a moment, is about circumcision on Shabbos. I'm pleased to report that over Rosh Hashanah, our Chabura was busy further researching, exploring, developing the topics that we've studied. And this is certainly a testament and a tribute to our wonderful Chabura. It was a great fargenigan to meet some of our members of the Chabura in the flesh on Rosh Hashanah, on the beach, and in Shul, sounding the shofar. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to wish a belated happy birthday to our dear Reb Beryl. Reb Beryl, so your Hebrew birthday was is Tzom Gedalia, and your English or the reverse?
Yeah, Tzom Gedalia, English, September 30th.
So we're catching up with Mirz Hashem to Reb Beryl's English birthday. We're right now sandwiched in between. And so we'll take this opportunity to wish Reb Beryl a year of Mazel and Bracha, Nachas and Gesund. And thank you for illuminating and inspiring and warming up our Gemara Shir every day. Hashem should give you koach to continue to be an active,
I had the
valued
Chabura in
participant.
mind if I do have any power to bless. So hopefully we'll have a good year.
Amen. Amen. All right, so now let's share the screen and let's get started. We had a little, of course, it's a new year. We had a lot to catch up. It's been a year since we we gathered last time. And so no one can blame us for that. So now we're going to go to a new segment of the Gemara. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer, which maybe I shouldn't, which is that it's been busy. So we're going to learn this Gemara together. It's been a few years since I learned this Gemara last. And so together we'll explore and we'll study. Our Mishnah, again, was talking about circumstances when we do and when we don't be mechalel Shabbos to deliver a bris. A timely bris is done on Shabbos, a not timely bris is not done on Shabbos. A baby is not well. Well, of course, we discussed last week that we defer, we hold back. A baby who needs medical care, we do on Shabbos. If a baby is not yet well enough, don't set up for trouble. So now we're going to talk about Suffolk ve'androgynous. We'll read Rabbi Steinsaltz's summary or elaboration of the Mishnah that's being alluded to. If there is an uncertainty whether or not to circumcise the baby, and likewise in the case of a hermaphrodite, in the words of the Talmud, and I think we'll stick to that, an androgynous, so one does not circumcise on Shabbos, doesn't desecrate Shabbos, rather, to perform the bris on a androgynous, even if it's the 8th day following birth. So an androgynous is and I think the Gemara will discuss, is a baby that is born with both male and female genitalia. We're not exactly sure halachically what the status of this baby is. Thankfully, quite rare, but not non-existent. And so the baby is many times afforded certain halachas relating to their male facet, certain halachas relating to the female aspect, certain leniencies based on the ambiguity of their identity. And so they get a bris, but because there's a suffix, the Mishnah says we're not going to do it on the 8th day. Why? Tana Rabbanan. So why don't they get the bris on Shabbos? So we have a brisa that says as follows. Ar lasa, it says Yimal uvayoyim hashmini yimol besar ar lasa. In Parshas Tazria, on the 8th day we should circumcise the flesh of the arla. Ar lasai vadai doiches Shabbos. If it is absolutely certain that what he has is a conventional arla, a conventional foreskin, so then we push aside Shabbos. Rashi. The verse which teaches us that we do a bris even on Shabbos. Ksiv b'seifei ar lasai, the mashma miuta ar lasai shelzeh v'loy acher. L'mutei safek asa. Basically, there's an added word yimel b'sar lasai, which creates an emphasis to tell us in a case of ambiguity, don't do the bris. This is what the Gemara says. Or lasai vaday doiches Shabbos. Let's see the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz. It says on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. They interpreted the word his foreskin, indicating only the circumcision of his halachically certain foreskin. So you see, Rabbi Steinsaltz adds a good word. Arlasa means the halachic foreskin. Obviously, you'll ask a doctor what the androgynous has is considered a foreskin, but it might not be halachically mandated. It's only a suffix, and therefore it overrides Shabbos. V'lo suffix doiche as a Shabbos. And not a suffix. So maybe the initial intention of the Mishnah was to talk about the suffix. The point is, if it's something that is certain, we're doiches Shabbos. If there is a doubt, a halachic doubt, we don't do a bris on Shabbos. Let's read Rashi on Androgynous. Sophiku. This is a suffix. The noilad ben hashmashas nami suffix, and a baby that is born on twilight. We are also not 1,000,000% sure if he was born on the day that we are exiting or the day we are entering. And so let's say the day the baby was born was Friday going into Shabbos. So if the baby's born on Friday, right, help me out. So when is his bris going to be? On Shabbos, right?
If the baby's born Friday, the bris will be on Friday.
No.
Friday.
Stop. You're right. That's what.
Friday.
Right. The baby's born Friday, his bris on Friday. But if he's born, so then the twilight.
If he's born Friday night, where it's already
yeah.
Shabbos already, then
the suffix can have to be. Well, I guess it can go both ways.
But Friday night, it banish mashas. If it's still Friday daytime,
right.
Then it's
so that's
Friday.
a shaila, but not the shaila of argument. The baby's born during Shalosh Shudas as the sun is setting in Bein Hashmashis. So then, is the baby born on Shabbos and his circumcision is on Shabbos?
Rabbi.
Was he born? Hold on, or was he born on Sunday and the bris is on Sunday? So we're not going to be doiches Shabbos on a suffix. We're going to wait till Sunday. Yes, Rabbi.
Is the Talmud going to have to deal with a definition of born?
Let us take a look. Let us see. Are you doubtful about what it means to be born?
At what point do they consider
you're saying
the
is
baby born?
Is the head emerging? Is the body? Good question. Let's look out for that. Let's look out for that question. It's a good question. And then there's another question, which is
Rabbi.
Yes, doctor.
So we're automatically treating this androgynous as though he's a boy.
For the purposes of circumcising his arla, yes.
Okay, so my next question is, when you do the bris, forget about whether it's Shabbos or not. You recite the brachos.
This is another very good question.
And you name so and so Ben so and so. Is that
you're asking two good questions? The second question I certainly don't know.
Right.
Meaning, how does the name go? Because you're asking a question that must have been a real question then. Of course, today it has a lot of resonance, and I don't. And I want to avoid getting too contemporary.
Okay.
But no, but I want to acknowledge that's a very good question and has relevance probably more than ever. But the first question is a very good question too, and I think this is what you're getting at. Safek brachos lehakel. If there's a doubt, if a bracha is warranted, generally speaking, we err on the side of not saying a bracha. If we're not certain if the bracha is warranted.
Right.
Here we're doing the circumcision as a suffix. So I suppose first I think the Gemara is going to discuss it again. As I told you, it's been a long time since I reviewed this Gemara, but the question that you're asking is actually a good one. We need to really understand, what does it mean that there is a suffix? Is it a suffix if the androgynous warrants a bris? And so let's see, the Gemara is going to give us more information. So let's keep those questions. Roberto's question, which was, remind me, Roberto, you had also a good question. About suffix. What is the definition of
born?
What is the chalois? When is the baby born? When is the baby's birthday? When is their halachic birthday? The head emerges, the arm emerges, right? We read in the Chumash that Tamar and Yehuda had a baby, two babies, right? One baby stuck out his hand. Was it Peretz? Who was first? Who's our Bible experts here? There was Peretz and Zerah, right? One that stuck the hand out first, and then one that actually came out first. I think Peretz was the first one. Anyways, So was that baby born when he stuck his hand out, but he pulled it back in? Not really. Okay, let's see. Rabbi Yehuda has a different take. And this, based on his argument, this will also answer. Rabbi Yehuda would have a different halachic take than the Tanakama. And Dr. Hammer, I think we could infer that Rabbi Yehuda would also have different halachas when it comes to the bracha and other kinds of treatment. And again, the Gemara is just beginning to warm up for this discussion. So let's take a look. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says no. Androgynos toiches Shabbos. The circumcision of an androgynos happens on Shabbos. Ve'anush kares, and failure to circumcise the androgynos. And if he would not give himself a circumcision when he comes of age, or she, when the androgynos comes of age, well, then he would receive kares. Yes, I know, or I want to acknowledge that there would be another question, which is a fair question, again, a very modern question, which is, what are the pronouns? How do we describe the androgynous? I'll show you. Rabbi Steinsaltz says if he is not a circumcised. No further comment. Maybe because Rabbi Yehuda says it's. Well, let's see. Again, I'm bringing it up because it would be a mistake not to note it, but I want to be very careful and have the full sensitivity for the topic, and that's why I prefer to acknowledge but stay generally in the Gemara's frame of reference. So Rabbi Yehuda says on the Shabbos v'anush kares. Why? Our losai vaday doiches Shabbos. Or losai. The previous interpretation was, is this halachically classified as arla? But as I said, you ask a doctor, what would you call this flesh? What is the medical term? Okay, I don't know if foreskin is a medical term. What would you call this? It is arla. It is foreskin. So vada, it's there. So it should be doiches Shabbos. But not a baby born in twilight. Why? Or lasai, you only circumcise him if it's a vadai. Or maybe I'm reading this wrong. First of all, it has to be with certainty. The androgynous. Okay, let me backtrack. Because I'm not sure. I think androgynous doiches the Shabbos v'anush kares. Period. Arla sai. I think it's the general. It says his arla. Vade doiches the Shabbos. Only when there is certainty, meaning the baby is born in a clear day, the 8th day you do the bris. So again, I'm rereading this Gemara. But not a baby that is born in twilight. We wait another day. Furthermore, number 2 or number 3, really. This is the third scenario. Scenario 1 is the androgynous. Scenario 2 is we're not sure when the baby is born. Scenario 3 is a baby who was born circumcised. Is Alan on today? No, but we'll make the recording available to him because I think he asked us about Noilad Mahol, a baby who was born already without the circumcision. So finally,
Rabbi,
yes.
Why is he punishable? He did not make the decision to have a bris or not have a bris.
Every
Shabbos or
single
not
baby who is obligated to have a bris, when they reach the age of mitzvahs, they then are obligated, if they weren't given a bris, to avail themselves, to get themselves a bris. So the baby isn't in trouble in their babyhood. There's no such thing as any baby or child that's under bar mitzvah, or maybe even up to 20, that is fully culpable for things that they could not have decided, or they do not have the ability to decide. So, and I don't know if you remember, there's different psukim that talk about a bris. There's a psukim that talk about b'yom hashmini yimel b'sar lasai. And then there's the verses by Abraham that talk about v'nichra samiyamav, and we clearly said that the verses that describe kares cannot be talking about a child. It's talking about the baby once they reach adulthood and they are no longer a baby. So the same thing would be here if an androgynous is halachically obligated to get a bris, then when they become an adult and they're chayiv in all the mitzvahs they are chayiv in, they would also have to give themselves a bris. Failure to do so would get kares. Again, we're still in the middle of a process, so I think a lot of things that haven't been brought up in the Gemara will yet be brought up. So again, back into the Brisa. Scenario 3, only if there's a certainly a halachically obligated arla, you have to push aside Shabbos. So a baby who was born without a foreskin, we are not doiches Shabbos. You're probably wondering what kind of desecrating of Shabbos can possibly happen to a baby who doesn't have a foreskin. There's nothing to cut. So here the Brisa continues, and again, I wish Alan was on, but it will remind me to invite him to see the recording. Shebe Shammai Oimrim, what Chilul Shabbos is there? Shammai says, Tzorech lehatif mimeno dambris. A baby born without an arla still needs to undergo a hatafas dambris, which was a nominal poke prick to bring a drop of blood. Beis Hillel Oimrim ein tzarech. Beis Hillel says you don't need. And again, the Gemara is going to discuss this in length. Let's see if other commentaries chime in at this point. So the Chassam Sofer points out something that I think it becomes somewhat obvious to us. When we say v'doiches Shabbos, or rather, I'm sorry, v'loy noilad kishumol doiches Shabbos, what would be the possible kind of doiches Shabbos? The baby doesn't have what to cut. So the Chassam Sofer points out, obviously, this is going according to Beis Hillel. And the Tanakam of our Brisa must follow Beis Shammai, meaning this. Let's see. All right, this is a little bit advanced. So, all right, let's see the Gemara. So again, as we see, remember we asked a baby who's born without a arla, what do you do? So here we have a partial answer. There's a machloikes. Beis Shammai says, give them a little prick, do hatafas dambris. By the way, if anybody has ever had to check blood, I guess maybe a person that is a diabetic, you have to take a little bit of blood. So they have very, very thin needles that just make the slightest prick. Now, I'm sure even the slightest prick would probably be very painful, but just to put it into context, again, I've not witnessed or experienced, so I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I'm hopeful that it's nominally painful. Let's take a fast peek, just because we're here.
When they take your blood, from the finger, you feel the same thing.
Right, but it doesn't hurt that much.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't hurt as much as when they try to stick a needle into you.
No.
So you feel something.
Actually, it's the caliber of the needle is what determines the pain.
The size,
thicker,
you're saying?
No, the thickness.
I'm saying the thickness, right?
The thickness. And the thicker it is, the more pain you feel.
So those little, what do we call them? Lancet? Is it called the lancets? What do they call it?
Yeah. I
Nachum,
remember.
what about the length of the needle?
Yeah, the length of the needle, that's the point. You see in the dental office, they come at you with this long needle and you get scared. But it's the gauge of the needle really that makes the difference, not the length. I'll tell you a personal story. When I was in 5th grade in Israel, I played around with a street cat and she bit me. And I didn't know which one it was, so they decided to give me rabies shots.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So I had 14 of them, and they came at me, and it was in the stomach with this big, long needle. And I remember the nurse telling me, don't be afraid. It's not the question of how long the needle is, it's how thick it is. And I remembered it until later on in dental school when they told us the same thing. I remember that. And it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. Anyway.
Anyways, all right. I just want to show you really fast over here. We let's not let this confuse us too much, but I just want to show you the bottom line. The Shulchan Aruch here says, androgynous, a person that is an androgynous, v'nol ben hashmashas, one who was born in twilight, v'noilad kishumol, and a person who was born without a foreskin. And here's a section that the Gemara didn't yet discuss. V'yoytze doifen, a C-section, a baby born with a C-section. V'akum shiyoda v'achar kach niskaira, a baby who's going to undergo conversion upon birth. Umishi yesh leishtei arla, so a person who's born with additional tissue. Amy lost on Shabbos, so we don't push aside Shabbos for that circumcision. So just so we see the bottom line, one more line, which again, we're jumping ahead. So we should, I'm reading it for you so we know the bottom line, but let's forget it once we finish reading it, right? That's easy to do. Noilad kishu mala, person that's baby, the baby that's born without a circumcision. They need to have a tafa. They have to have a slight prick, a drop of blood. Umio benachas. It should be done very delicately. It should be done in a way that's going to not cause no or nominal pain. Very interesting.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I know you don't want to get into it, but I'm still very uncomfortable that from the very beginning, this hermaphrodite, which theoretically could be a girl, could be a boy. Now we has both. Is everything there is treated masculine? It's a mum that that we're going to have to deal with at some point, but we just go on and figure out when we should do it, how we should do it, and everything like that. And I find that very.
I'm not sure I understand. You're saying, why are we treating this hermaphrodite as a boy?
Yeah.
I don't know if we're actually treating them as a boy. We're treating the hermaphrodite as an individual, which has his own unique set. Now, I think I'll explain to you. I pointed out that they use the word he, but it's possible. It's possible, and that's more the result of the Hebrew language, which there's a little bit of a default gender. The default gender errors on the side of he. I'm not sure.
This is a use default of English language because the Hebrew doesn't say anything.
No, so I'm saying because there's a certain gender built into Hebrew, so therefore translators also, I don't know. Again, I really don't know enough about a hermaphrodite to really weigh in. Maybe the male genitalia are simply upon birth more visible. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm sure it's an agonizing circumstance to be born into. I can't even imagine. The Talmud and Halacha tends to have sometimes, or not something, tends to approach it very clinically. Meaning the Halacha just says what the Halacha is. The Halacha in the Halachic conversation doesn't really give a lot, in almost any context, doesn't give a lot of psychological insight one way or another about how we tend to the baby psychologically. Not that the Gemara doesn't ever consider the psychology of a person, but when it comes to the halachic question, there's sometimes a very cold and clinical kind of approach. And I'm not saying this as a criticism nor as a defense, more just as an observation, which explains why there is no reference at this point of the great compassion that would need to be had for someone that was born into what is certainly a very challenging and unique circumstance. And I'll say this, I suspect, again, I don't know exactly, and I think today there's studies, so we could probably Google, Dr. Stalman could Google, and we'll know that it's 1 in 600,000 or whatever the statistical probability of such a baby being born. But the reality is that in times past, I'm sure such a individual would not have peers that were going through similar things. Today, there's support groups, and there's a lot more resources. I don't mean just hermaphrodite. I'm just saying any person that's born lo aleinu with a unique condition.
Rabbi.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Hold on. Beryl was opening a can of worms. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's first. He's first.
I was just going to say, if you put it in historical perspective, at the time that they're dealing with this, I think it's fantastic that they try to figure out what to do. We can't bring today's crazy 83 categories into play.
I don't think that's what we're doing. I think we're just trying to understand the treatment.
No, but the Talmud deals with it in marriage also, the whole story again. Hermaphrodites, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it really, once you decide if it's an Ola or not, it has ramifications as far as mitzvahs in general, because if he's a male, then he has, if he's female, He's part of him for many mitzvahs, and if he's male,
Right.
he has to follow.
So there's
a lot of mitzvahs.
there's a vast discussion about the halachas of an androgynous, not just about circumcision. Right now, we're really, our objective is not so much to talk about androgynous. We're talking about all different types of scenarios where there's a suffix. So again, it's really, in a sense, coming up and passing. It's hard for us to encounter such a halachic conversation and take it in passing because it's so, it's so
Dramatic.
it so catches our attention, and we so feel for the individual, and especially with the degree of modern sensitivity, which so it's hard just to take it and move on.
I'll put it on the list because it's really.
I have a question.
Hold on, one second. I'm fairly confident that if we'll search the halachic journals, I'm fairly certain you'll have lengthy essays on the androgynous and halacha, and an androgynous and contemporary halacha, and then let alone getting into the most contemporary issues, which again I want to strongly stay away. I don't have enough expertise to both halachically and sensitively navigate the discussion.
Rabbi, for Bernie, imagine today when a person reaches the age and has to make a decision, and he says he's a male, and we.
I'd really prefer to avoid all contemporary.
I'm not looking for an answer.
No, but I prefer to even avoid the discussion beyond the halachic aspect. Eli?
I can't ask my question. You said you wanted to avoid it.
Thank you for your sensitivity to me. I appreciate it. So anyways, so we discussed 3 scenarios: androgynous, born in ben hashmashes, and born without a foreskin. Now, when Eli's Moel came on board, if you recall, he mentioned that sometimes a baby is born with less arla or a short arla, but it may yet be, maybe a pediatrician would say, oh, the baby doesn't need to be circumcised. It is yet possible that halacha would say, actually, this baby does have some arla tissue that does.
I could bring him on if you want. Today's Thursday. He's available.
Let's.
Okay. Okay.
In Yiddish, we'll say haltzich in the. When we finish this whole sugya, then maybe we'll bring on a panel of mohalim to duke out all of the big discussions, because we're getting more material. So why don't we wait until the end, and then we can do it. All right. Amar Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Shimon Elazar clarified. By the way, I think Rabbi Shimon Elazar is considered a student of Shammai. Is that possible? There actually is no machlokes on noiled kishumol shetzarich lahativ mimeno dambris. There is no question that a baby born without a arla, or in the words of the Gemara, born already circumcised, there's no question that there needs to be atafas dambris. Because it is possible or likely that there is an arla and it's just hidden. Rashi shetzarich lahativ chayshinan shema arla kivushahi. We're afraid maybe there is a hidden, maybe pulled down, I think was maybe how the Moel described that the arla might be stuck in a down position, making it less visible, but still there. Which, by the way, I'm going to convey my doubts over here. Is it possible that when we say lahatif, maybe this hatafa is not simply to draw blood? Maybe that hatafa is to probe for the possibility of arla tissue that needs to be trimmed. And maybe that's what that hatafa's dam is, to kind of probe and separate and see if there is such skin. I'm going to leave the question as a question mark for the moment, but we'll keep an eye to really understand what this hatafa is doing, if it's simply to draw blood or if there is a greater function as well. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree. A baby born without an arla gets hatafa's dam. Because, in the words of Rabbi Shimon Elazar, explaining both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, there really is, there's work to be done. There is circumcision necessary. Maybe it's not conventional, maybe it's not as much tissue, but there's something to do. Where is there a genuine, legitimate machloikes? Al gershin iskar kishu mohol. A baby, I'm sorry, not a baby. An individual who's converting and was circumcised as a baby. Let's say King Charles wants to become a Yid. Well, we know that King Charles was circumcised by a kosher religious mohel, but there was nothing religious about his circumcision. And now if King Charles is going to come and have another bris, when he wants to convert, there will be no arla to cut. So what is the protocol for, that would be a very catchy title for today's subject. What if King Charles wants to convert?
A question.
Yes.
I have a question. So the question I'm just thought about, and I want maybe to ask, Hashem said, do a bris in 8 days. What is the whole main purpose that you do the bris and it's Baruch Hashem, everything is good, now you consider Jewish? Is that a sign that it's from Judaism to Goyim? Or really, what is the whole real definition of a bris?
The bris is a covenant etched into the human physiology, testifying to the relationship between a Jew and his God from the earliest of times, from the time of Avraham Avinu until today.
Right.
That is the essential definition or purpose of the bris. In much of human history, it also served very starkly to set apart a Jew from a Gentile, because Gentiles were not circumcised and Jews were. As a matter of fact, throughout history, including more recent history, a bris might have been used to discriminate and to identify a Jew. I believe people that were in the Soviet Union might be able to confirm either that this was the case, or maybe that's the reason why many Soviet babies, besides for the fact that the actual procedure was illegal, but because there's evidence of it, and it would set a person up for discrimination and a lack of availability of molim in general. But in Roman times as well, there's the famous, hold on, I think I know where you're getting at. There's a famous story.
Wait, hold on. This is the famous question.
Hold on.
Now,
I have the mute, Rebelli, I have the mute button. I'm not going to use it, but just let me finish my sentence and then you'll continue.
Okay, fine.
So there's the famous story of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Antoninus as babies. Where did the friendship started according to the Gemara, where there was a Roman decree at the time not to circumcise, and Rabbi Yehuda's parents circumcised him, and he was called to bring the baby up to a Roman court of sorts, and there was a death penalty, and they were in the inn. It's in the Gemara, and the parents of Antoninus invited them to swap babies. They brought the Gentile baby who was uncircumcised, and then they traded back. So we see that from the earliest of times, this was something that was a real distinction. Eli, I think what your question is, if that's the case, how did a religious Moel circumcise King Charles if he was obliterating this distinction?
No.
Well, if you would have asked that question, it would have been a good question. Now let's hear your question.
So the other question is now that the non-Jews are doing brises, are they considered Jewish?
No.
Not at all, because the mother wasn't Jewish.
Bris is just a component of conversion. A Jew ideally does a bris, but circumcision, absent all the other facets of conversion, is Jewishly meaningless, except that it'll lead to our discussion here if the person wants to convert. Which brings us back to what is King Charles.
Wait, hold on. So a non-Jew could say, oh, I'm 20 years old. I want to become Jewish. I had a bris when I was young. What do I have to do now?
That's exactly the subject that our Gemara is discussing. What do you do if you're 20 years old or 75 years old and you're King Charles and you've just gone through a lot of traumatic changes? You lost your mother, you became king, and now he wants to add a third change. He wants to become Jewish. What does he do in the bris department? That's our Gemara's question.
I think that what the rabbi said was that the Charles' circumcision was done by a kosher moel, but the rabbi didn't say it was a kosher circumcision.
That's true.
It just was a kosher moel, who probably didn't make a blessing and didn't worry about how kosher the circumcision was.
Oh, halachically the bris was useless. But the question is if he removed as much tissue as is removed in a Jewish bris. Assuming that he did, King Charles will now have a problem if he wants to convert. And now let's see what the solution will be. When is there a debate? King Charles wants to convert, and he already has a bris, or anybody else on planet Earth that has a bris and wants to convert. Shammai says this person, in addition to going to the mikvah, in addition to accepting all the mitzvahs in the context of a Beis Din, in accordance to halacha, they also need, according to Beis Shammai, to have a prick, hatafas dam bris, in order for them to be Jewish, because part of the conversion process is a circumcision. Beis Hillel says, there is no need to further prick the individual in order for them to be considered gemalit, in order for them to be considered to have had a circumcision. Rashi Alger, the Leka Shum Safik Arla, Kigoin Aravi Mo. So Rashi did not have King Charles as an example, but he did have another example. Arabs, we know, circumcised themselves at 13, but they circumcised themselves, and therefore an Arab who wants to convert will also be unable to get a conventional bris. I'm sure if Rashi would have lived today, he probably would have said King Charles. And so that's the machlokes. Now, this discussion, of course, kind of has implications for this discussion, because this Brisa says Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing about Nolad Mohu. Rabbi Shimon Lazar says that the discussion has to do with a converting Gentile, but a Jew would always need to have a tafas dam. So, I mean, practically we're going to follow Beis Hillel. No, practically we follow Beis Shammai in this context, or possibly Beis Hillel, and we paskin that a person that's converting does need to have a tafas dam bris. And as I told you, sometimes, many times, a person who thinks they had a complete circumcision, but the mohel, the adult mohel, may determine that there needs to be an additional trimming to bring it up to code. But that is let's see Tosfos. Tosfos quotes the words of our Gemara. Like nechleku al noilad kishumol shetzarach latev ben adam bris, alma nechleku al gersh niskar. So the Rabbi Shimon Lazar says everybody agrees that a baby born circumcised needs to have a tafas dam, but what about when they convert? Hashla mashma the yoiser yesh lahatzrich hatafa lenoilad kishu mohel milin is gayer kishu mohel. It sounds like there's a greater urgency or obvious need to do hatafa for a baby who was born without an arla than a person that is converting. The lenoilad kuli alma moida, person that's born without a bris. Everybody agrees he needs a circumcision. Uveger ikaplukta. And when it comes to a convert, there's a machlokes. Im came the kamon, the pasik rav halacha kitanakama. Umashma mit the kama semi the kama law made the kama rav ada barava tasty divri adarav keeping the kama kitanakama but nearly kishumol she'ain sarach latam adam bris coaching and shgar shumol. So basically, Tosfos points out that based on the later Gemara, we're going to need some additional synthesizing between this Gemara and that Gemara. But at this point, in the discussion, it seems like it's even more important that a baby born without an arla would need to have a tafas dam. Amar Mar. So now we're going to quote the Brisa above that's on the topic of a baby that is a suffix. Amar Mar v'lo suffix doiches Shabbos. The Brisa said, I think it was the Brisa, yeah, or maybe even our Mishnah. Was it our Mishnah or was it a Brisa? See, I don't even remember. That a suffix does not push aside Shabbos. What circumstance are we describing when we say that a suffix is not doiches Shabbos? Dr. Hammer, get ready. This is another Gemara that's going to push our buttons, because I think you already mentioned this. What we're discussing here, that a suffix doesn't push aside Shabbos is Ben Shiva, a baby that's born after 7 months of pregnancy. Mechalin olav esa Shabbos. We desecrate Shabbos. Ben Shmoine, but a baby that's 8 months old. And we'll see in Rashi in a moment. Ein mechalin olav esa Shabbos. For such a baby, we do not desecrate Shabbos for such a baby. Safek ben Shiva v'Safek ben Shmoina. What if we don't know? If the baby is 7 months old or 8 months old, Ein mechalin olav esa Shabbos. This baby does not get chilul Shabbos to circumcise the baby. So let's see Rashi. Let's make sure we understand. I just want to clarify, although my initial reading might have thought this, we're not talking about to save the baby. We're talking about giving the baby a circumcision. So a suffix isn't the cheshab. So a baby that's 7 months old, I'll explain in a moment, gets a circumcision. An 8-month-old baby does not immediately get a circumcision, and therefore we don't make the bris on Shabbos. If we are not sure, is the baby 7 months of pregnancy and gets the bris, or 8 months and doesn't, we don't mechal Shabbos. What's going on over here? So in the time of the Gemara, there was an understanding, there was a medical assumption, which I don't know how that was born or if there's any kind of contemporary scientific circumstance that might lend us to presume this. But in the time of the Gemara, there was a medical understanding that a baby had 2 options. There were 2 kinds of babies. There were babies born 7 months into pregnancy, and there were babies born 9 months into pregnancy. Both were considered viable. But a baby born after 8 months of pregnancy was considered a preemie. So there were 7-month-old babies that were born at term. There are 9-month-old babies that were born at term, and then there were premature babies at 8 months old. A preemie is still very precarious. Today, a premature baby is brought into the NICU. They're given a lot of support. If it's an incubator or IV or whatever other kinds of support that needs to help the baby. And Baruch Hashem, many babies that are born premature live to a ripe old age to be very functional and successful. In the time of the Gemara, a preemie was likely not going to survive. And so the preemie was presumed to not survive. And therefore, at this point, we're not going to give them a bris. We're going to wait for them to either become stronger or, God forbid, to go the way of premature babies in a time of more primitive medicine.
I don't understand something. Why do you call an 8-month-old baby a preemie and not a 7-month-old baby a preemie?
From the perspective of the Gemara, the medicine of the time understood that you have babies that are born 7 months and they're born to term, and then you had 9-month babies that were born at term, and a 8-month baby, meaning a baby born after 8 months of pregnancy, was considered a premature baby.
I think what they considered 7 months was they made a mistake, as opposed to it was really early.
What's relevant practically is, again, really what we're describing is 2 babies sent to term. I'm born at term, and then an 8-month-old. I'm using the paradigm of the Gemara, but today's medicine obviously doesn't support this. But just to understand the language of the Gemara. So a ben shiva means a baby that had the kind of baby that has a shorter pregnancy. This is not, I don't believe there's any contemporary medical support for this idea, but this is a halachic conversation based on the halachic knowledge of the time of the Gemara. If there's a deeper esoteric meaning behind it, I'm sure there was, but I don't know what it is. Or maybe a very, very big purist would say maybe in the time, once upon a time, the gestation, there was more variation in human gestation, and today it became much more uniform. I don't think that's going to hold up in science, but I'm just telling you that it's a discussion to be had. Suffice it to say, what's really important here is the 8-month-old baby who is a preemie, and a baby who we're not sure if they were premature or not. Today, we'll look at the baby individually and assess. We'll rate their APGAR, and we'll determine we'll rate how well they are, and then we'll decide. From the time of the Gemara, there was a little bit different terminology, different halachic considerations. Let's read Rashi, and then we're gonna have to call it a day, leaving us a little bit of a cliffhanger here. Ben ches ein mechalin olav. Shahare kemesu. Unfortunately, a premature baby in those days was as good as a not viable baby. The ein milasai mitzvah, and there's no mitzvah to give the baby a circumcision. Now, I think we could have probably taken this a step further and said a baby that's medically precarious, how can you subject them to a traumatic procedure? Maybe that's baked into the cake here. If you'll ask a question, hold on, this baby, it's not considered chil. Maybe if you're literally considering the baby to not be alive, then what are you doing? So there's a lot more to discuss. The Gemara is going to talk a lot more about this. But suffice it to say, the bottom line is, an 8-month-old baby, a baby born prematurely, does not get a bris. What if you're not sure if it's premature or born to term? Then you don't mechalel Shabbos for such a baby, because halachically you're not sure if they need to have a bris. There's a lot more that needs to be understood. With Hashem's help, I'm not promising we're going to understand everything, but with Hashem's help, tomorrow we'll have the opportunity to dig deeply and gain a greater and broader perspective on what's going on over here.
Rabbi,
Yes.
your example of King Charles is not so ridiculous, because there are stories that Kate Middleton is Jewish, therefore her son, who's in line after, would be Jewish.
Sounds like fun.
If it happens, Rabbi, I think we should sponsor a royal kiddush.
I'll agree with that.
tell you what, I like that one.
If King Charles converts, we'll also sponsor a royal kiddush. But we're not promoting. We don't believe in proselytization, so we're not actually encouraging. This should not be misconstrued. This could go on the internet. It could go viral. We're not actually calling upon King Charles to convert. But if he would convert, according to halacha, we'll embrace him with open arms, and we'll throw him a royal kiddush if he ever comes and visits. My dear friends, have a wonderful day.
I have one more question.
Okay.
It's around the Torah to my dad this Sunday. Please, everyone is welcome.
Mazel tov. That's very exciting, very special news. Thank you for the invitation. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it, but we'll be there in spirit. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Very nice, exciting news. Your friends, have a wonderful day. Hoping to see everyone tomorrow. Chumash will start in a moment on the same link.